A boy named Shawn goes for an early morning run before heading to school. As he sits outside, he sees a bully messing around with a new student and throwing his books away. Shawn looks disgusted by this, but he doesn't do anything. Shortly after, while he's in class, the teacher comes in and mentions that he'll be reviewing their test because many of them failed.
Today we'll be reviewing your tests.
As he distributes their test sheets, he commends Shawn for doing very well and says he's the only one who got a perfect score. One of Shawn's classmates, Steve, then sees a chemistry textbook on his table and asks why he has one even though he doesn't take chemistry classes. Shawn says he just likes reading different topics during his spare time. Steve doesn't seem to care, and he tells Shawn about a party at one of their classmates' house.
Jody Friedman's having a party at her house tomorrow.
Shawn asks if he's going, and as Steve says he is, he mentions that he'll think about it. After school that day, Shawn takes the train to head home. While he's seated inside, a homeless man keeps trying to annoy people inside the train, and Shawn doesn't get this. The man eventually catches Shawn staring at him, but he quickly turns his face away. He then gets off the train at his bus stop before walking home. The next morning, Shawn sits to have breakfast with his dad, Terry, who asks how things are going for his son at school. He also asks how Shawn performed on his test, and he says he did okay. Terry doesn't understand this, and as he asks for what Shawn really scored, he says he had a perfect score. Terry thinks it's better than okay, and he looks happy that his son is doing well at school. Shortly after, Terry says he'd like to go and see Shawn's mom, Mary. He asks if Shawn would like to come with him, but he says he has a party to attend with a friend.
Going to this party tonight.
Terry looks surprised to hear that his son has a friend, and as he asks him about it, Shawn says he's not sure that his dad knows who Steve is. He also says he doesn't mind skipping the party if it's what Terry wants. Terry says he's fine with it, and that he's happy his son is going to a party. As Terry eventually leaves the house, Shawn packs a big bag and heads out. Terry then buys a flower and takes it to the cemetery to drop it at Mary's grave. It turns out that many years ago, Mary was killed in front of Shawn's eyes by a carjacker who eventually ran away and was never caught. Terry says sorry to Mary for not visiting her frequently. He mentions that he has been quite busy, but he doesn't want to use it as an excuse. He also talks about how much he misses her. After talking about a leak he just fixed at the new apartment, he says sorry for not bringing Shawn, though he mentions that their son now has friends, and he went to a party with one of them.
Hey, I finally got that leak in my room fixed.
Meanwhile, Shawn doesn't go to the party, and he just walks through a shady door near a supermarket. After a few hours, he leaves the place and takes a train home. Before he reaches his bus stop, he sees a young boy on the train with his mom, and this reminds Shawn of how he used to go out with Mary. He also remembers a time when Mary took him to a small musical. He had a bruise on his face at the time, and as they left the show, a woman named Linda asks what happened to him. Shawn says he fell, and Mary interrupts him and tells Linda that he fell off his bike. Linda then tells Shawn to be more careful next time, and Mary takes him home. Surprisingly, it turns out that Terry had actually beaten Shawn and left a bruise on his face. At the time, he was without a good job and always got himself drunk. Aside from beating Shawn, he also beats Mary sometimes in front of their son. Back to the present, a homeless lady begs a gangster named Tony to give her more time to pay him what she owes.
No, Tony, I got screwed up this week.
As Tony sees that she has kids, he eventually lets her go. Suddenly, he sees someone in a black hoodie staring at him. It eventually turns out to be Shawn, and Tony approaches him with a colleague named Stretch. As they ask what Shawn wants, he doesn't say anything, and Tony threatens to beat him up. Shawn then accuses him of killing a little boy a while ago. As Stretch wonders what he's talking about, Tony punches Shawn and pushes him to the ground. After standing up, Shawn eventually brings out a gun, and Tony looks shocked. Stretch then tells Shawn to calm down, but Tony still tries to take the gun from him. Before he does this, Shawn shoots him, and Stretch runs away from the scene. The next day, a detective named Ames arrives at a courthouse while receiving a call from her ex-husband, who asks why she hasn't come to pick up their son as part of their custody agreement. Ames says she's busy, but that she'll still come for her son. She adds that she doesn't want her ex-husband to report her to his lawyers. As she heads into a courtroom to observe the proceedings of a criminal named Larry, she sees that the judge isn't around found yet. Larry is already in court though, and he asks Ames if he can talk to her for a minute.
Detective Ames, can I talk to you a minute?
Even though Ames doesn't know what he wants to talk about, she agrees to listen to him. Larry then says that when he's free, he'd like to go on a vacation with her and her son. Ames says he can never escape prison, but Larry asks where she thinks his lawyer is. As Ames looks confused, Larry mentions that his lawyer is already at the DA's office, trying to cut a deal and put him on witness protection. He then mentions that when he's out, Ames will be the first person he'll visit because she's the one who caught him in the first place. Ames looks worried about this, and as the judge enters the courtroom, she returns to her seat. Just then, the judge mentions that the case will be postponed to a later date. Ames looks shocked by this, and as Larry is being taken away, she realizes that he's not lying. After she leaves the court, Ames heads to the police department and meets her new partner, Gary. Shawn also happens to be at the police department to see another detective named Bill. After Gary introduces himself to Ames, he congratulates her on her promotion and says she should be proud of being a detective.
I should be proud because I made it to homicide, or I should be...
Meanwhile, Bill sees the cut on Shawn's face and asks how he got it. Shawn says he got jumped on the train, but he couldn't see the guys really well. Bill then asks if he was at least still able to land a blow on one of them, and Shawn says he only took one shot. Bill doesn't know what Shawn is talking about, and he just leaves him to continue what he's doing on his computer. A while later, Ames heads to the storage room to print some documents. As she gets there, she sees Shawn inside and asks what he's doing there. Shawn says he only wanted to print a few things and that Bill knows him. He also says sorry if he shouldn't be there, but Ames says she's sure it's not a problem and that she's only being careful because she's still new. As Shawn takes his things and leaves, Ames reprints the last page of his document to see what he came to do. She then sees that he printed some search results about a chemical named triceleron. Later that night, as Ames is about to leave work, she sees that her car has a punctured tire. As she tries to fix it, her ex-husband calls her and asks why she hasn't come to pick up their son. Ames says she has been really busy and that she's not intentionally being late. As a car passes right next to her, she gets startled and her phone falls on the road. A car also crushes it, and Shawn appears in the dark and picks it up for her. Ames looks surprised to see him, and he offers to help her replace the punctured tire. Shortly after, Shawn replaces the tire, and Ames thanks him for it. She also suggests driving him home, but he says he prefers to take the train.
Oh, no thanks. I take the train.
Elsewhere, Terry goes grocery shopping and buys a few things to prepare dinner for him and his son. After he's done, he heads home and meets his son inside the basement, training with a punching bag. Terry asks if Shawn is still angry about the fight that left him with a cut on his face. Shawn doesn't say anything, and Terry mentions that it's nothing to be ashamed of because he also got beaten a few times when he was younger. He then collects the gloves and shows Shawn a new boxing technique. He looks quite good at it, and he asks Shawn if he understands what he just did.
Could be getting more power behind your straight right.
Shawn says he does, and as he's about to walk away, Terry says that since his son's birthday is coming up, he's planning to do something little for him. Shawn doesn't say anything, and Terry mentions that he'll call him when dinner is ready. As Shawn heads to his room, he remembers how his mom used to stop Terry from beating him up as a child. The next day, Stretch is brought to the station as a suspect regarding Tony's murder. After hearing his story, Ames asks what Gary thinks, and he says there's not much to think about because it's pretty clear that someone who didn't like Tony killed him. He also mentions that he can't help but think Stretch is responsible because after Tony died, he was caught in the streets selling Tony's drugs. Ames thinks there has to be more to the story, but Gary says she's just trying to make a big deal out of a small case.
More than likely, that little criminal in there killed him.
Shortly after, Shawn arrives at the police department and heads straight to Bill's desk. Ames sees this and asks Gary about Shawn. Gary then mentions that Shawn saw someone kill his mom about 10 years ago, and Bill has been allowing him to come in since then to look at mugshots on his computer to see if the criminal has been busted for something else. Ames sounds surprised that Shawn uses the computer without any supervision, but Gary says he doesn't ask questions about it because Bill is a highly respected detective. As they then learn that Stretch is about to call his lawyer,
Ready to go, Junior Mafia is about to call his lawyer.
Gary tells Ames that they need to go and see him. Before she heads out, Ames stops stops at Bill's desk and sees Shawn looking at the mugshot of a guy named Joe. She jokes that he's ugly, and Shawn says that most criminals are. She then thanks him for helping her the previous day, but he says it's not a problem. She adds that she'd like to repay him by helping him with what he's trying to find.
Maybe I can help you with your work.
Shawn says she doesn't have to, but Ames insists, and he doesn't say anything else. After she leaves with Gary, Shawn opens a new burner phone and calls someone to ask for a girl. Later that night, he then goes to the front of a house where Joe is beating his girlfriend. Shawn eventually confronts him, but Joe looks pissed and fights back. The fight eventually gets really intense, with Joe's car getting destroyed in the process. They both injure each other, and Joe tells his girlfriend to go inside the house. He then tells Shawn that he doesn't understand why he tried to involve himself in a private matter. He adds that his girlfriend will eventually suffer for it after Shawn leaves. Just then, Shawn brings out a gun and kills Joe before running away. As he gets home, he cleans his injuries and remembers how numb he felt when he got to the police department after Mary was killed. After this, Shawn injects himself with steroids before going to bed. The next day, Ames and Gary go to Joe's house to ask his girlfriend, Lizzie, about what happened the previous night. Lizzie explains everything and mentions that she didn't really see the other guy well because he wore a hoodie. Ames asks if she'll be able to describe him to a sketch artist, but Lizzie says she can't do that because the guy saved her life.
Saved my life.
As Gary then asks about the young girl Joe murdered, Ames says he got away with it from what she read, and Linda mentions that he used to laugh about it. She adds that he would have killed her one day too, and it's why she can't help them catch the guy that killed him. Shortly after, Ames and Gary leave the house and head to their car. Ames then receives a call from someone who tells her that Larry is about to cut a deal with the DA. This leaves her frustrated, and as Gary asks why she's so bothered about it, she says she lost 2 years of her life to the case. She adds that she lost her marriage and her son, and it will be for nothing if Larry is allowed to go freely without any charge.
I gave 2 years of my life to this case, Gary. I lost.
Gary feels sorry for her and asks if she needs a minute alone, but Ames says she's fine. She then mentions that the person Lizzie talked about sounded a lot like the person who killed Tony. As she says they might be the same person, Gary mentions that it's hard to strike a connection because the only thing they know about the killer is that he wore a black hoodie. However, Gary says they should head to the coroner's office to see if the bullet that killed Joe is from the same gun that was used to kill Tony. Elsewhere, Shawn heads to the secret location beside the supermarket again, and it turns out to be a gym. There, he trains with a professional and learns some new moves. After his training, his coach commends him for doing well, and he also advises Shawn to register for the upcoming boxing tournament at the gym. Shawn asks why he should do that, and the man says it would just be for fun. Shawn then says he doesn't train for fun.
I don't do this for fun.
And he leaves afterward. Meanwhile, Ames and Gary wait for the coroner to determine whether Joe and Tony were killed with the same gun. Gary eventually gets tired of waiting, so he says he wants to get something outside. Ames then remembers that Shawn was looking at Joe's picture the other day at the police department. Following this, she asks the coroner's assistant if he knows what tricelaron is. The man says he hasn't worked on it before, but he knows what it is. As he then tells his boss that Ames just asked about tricelaron, the coroner mentions that even though people classify it as a poison,
poisons the muscular system, Artie. It is thus a poison.
It's not really one. He adds that it causes a chemical reaction that suffocates the body. Ames looks shocked by this, and she wonders why Shawn was looking into it. Much later, Ames arrives home, and after a while, she starts looking into Mary's case. The next day, Ames sees Shawn just outside the police department and says she has been looking for him. Shawn asks why, and she says she has already started looking at his mom's case file. She then asks if he wouldn't mind getting some snacks with her.
I'm going to lunch if you want to join me.
Shawn agrees to follow her, and on their way to the restaurant, she mentions that he's quite different from the average high school student. Shawn says she likes asking questions, and Ames says she can't help it because it's part of her job. She then tells him to ask a question, and Shawn asks how long she was married. Ames sounds surprised to hear that he knows about her marriage, and he says he read it in a newspaper article. Ames then asks how he knows that she's divorced, and he says he can see sadness in her eyes, as if she has lost something before. Ames then says that if she's sad about anything, it's her son and not her ex-husband. She adds that her ex-husband had a lot of money and hired many lawyers, so it was easy for him to file for custody and ensure that she only sees her son on Wednesdays and some weekends. Shawn then feels sorry for her, and he says he's sure her son loves her. Following this, they enter the restaurant, and Ames asks for 2 egg rolls. The owners are Chinese people, and they speak their language to insult Ames before preparing her order. Shawn is shocked by this, and as Ames is insulted again while taking her order, he speaks Chinese and tells them to watch their mouths, or he'll have to come back and kill them. The restaurant owners are shocked by this, and Ames takes Shawn outside. He then explains that he learned Chinese when he was younger because his mom wanted him to learn multiple languages. Ames then says she has taken a look at Mary's case, and she thinks there's not much available to find a random carjacker. Shawn asks if that's what she came to tell him, but she says she only thought it would be good for him to move on with his life since it's already been over 9 years. Shawn says she knows nothing about his life, but Ames says she's only trying to help him. Shawn says he would have let go if his mom died a natural death, but her killer is probably out there living life without remembering what he did. He then asks Ames what would happen if he found the killer.
What if I told you I found the killer?
She says he would be brought in and charged with murder, but Shawn says he's sure things won't go down like that because without proof, it would just be his word against that of the killer. Ames says they still have to follow due process, but Shawn says he doesn't believe in it. He adds that due process never works for people, and it's why Ames lost her child too. As he walks away, Ames stops him and asks what he wants with triceleron. Shawn sounds shocked and says he recently wrote a paper on poisons for his chemistry assignment.
Wrote a paper on the history of poisons in my chemistry class.
As he adds that he had an A, he asks if he can leave, and she says he can. Later that night, Ames meets Gary at a bar where the detectives in her police department are having a party. Gary then mentions that based on what they've found so far about Tony and Joe, he believes they pissed off the same guy who then killed them. Ames then mentions that Tony killed a young boy a while ago and got away with it. As she suggests that the killer is probably a vigilante, Gary tells her to stop making things up. Ames then goes to say hello to Bill, but he doesn't look happy to see her. He sounds particularly pissed that she has been bothering Shawn, and he tells Ames to leave him alone because there's so much she doesn't understand about what happened to him as a child. Ames is disappointed by this, and she leaves the bar with Gary. While they're inside the train, a woman brings her children to their coach and tells the cops inside that there's a fight going on in the other coach. It then turns out that Shawn is on the train, and after speaking Chinese and telling the woman's child to move to the other coach, he starts a fight with the homeless guy who is always trying to annoy people. Just as Shawn beats him up, the cops reach the coach, and he quickly jumps off the train. Ames and Gary also run after him, but they're unable to catch him. Shortly after, Shawn enters his room through the window and meets his dad waiting for him. Terry asks where his son has been, but Shawn doesn't tell him. As Terry then sees the steroids he has been using, he says he's disappointed in Shawn for taking a shortcut to building muscle instead of going to the gym. He adds that he raised Shawn better than that.
Tell me that I raised you better than that.
As Shawn responds, it turns out there's no one in his room, and he's only seeing things. Elsewhere, Ames learns that the person who beat the homeless guy told the woman's son to leave the coach. Ames looks confused because the woman and her children don't speak English, but she's told that the guy spoke Chinese.
This guy spoke Chinese.
And this leaves her shocked. The next morning, Shawn wakes up and sees Ames pointing a gun at him, but it eventually turns out that it's Terry, who has come to wake his son up so they can spend the entire day together on his birthday.
It's a surprise. Get up.
Terry then takes his son to eat one of the best cakes in the city at a place called Tina's. While they're eating, a lady named Erin comes over to meet Terry and calls him Rock. He recognizes her as someone who used to work at Tina's back in the day, and he looks happy to see her. Erin then says it has been a long time since she saw him, and he says he has relocated to another part of the city. He also introduces Erin to Shawn, and she says she didn't know Mary was pregnant. Erin then mentions that she bought the place many years years ago, and that Terry can check the back to see pictures of him and his friends from back in the day. Terry tells Aaron to stay with Shawn while he goes to check it. Shawn then asks why Aaron called Terry a rock earlier, and she says it was his nickname. She adds that the name was given to him because he was a good boxer like Rocky.
You know, like the fighter, the boxer?
However, she mentions that Terry never went pro and that most of his fights were on the streets. After Terry checks the pictures, he suddenly tells Shawn that they need to leave, and Aaron doesn't understand this. As they leave, Shawn asks why they're leaving so hurriedly, and he says he doesn't want them to miss the first fight. Shawn still looks confused, but Terry takes him to a boxing tournament where they watch different fighters go up against each other. After this, Terry takes his son to where Mary was killed, and he says he wants his son to remember it. Shawn says he hasn't forgotten about it, and Terry says he knows. He adds that he brought his son to remind him that Mary's life ended there and not his. He also says sorry for how he always treated him when he was younger. Terry feels sad as he talks about it,
And I'll never forgive myself for the person that I was.
and he says he wants his son to move on and be happy. Shawn accepts Terry's apology and hugs him before they leave together. Elsewhere, Ames goes to meet Bill to ask about Shawn's story. Bill then invites her into his house and tells her that when Shawn was brought to the police department on the day Mary died, he had a blank expression but was visibly hurt as he looks at the pictures of criminals in the city to see if he can recognize who killed Mary. Shawn identifies one of them, but Terry tells him that he made a mistake. Shawn sounds sure of who he picked, but as Terry continues to convince him otherwise, he eventually mentions that he picked the wrong person. Bill says he could see how betrayed Shawn felt, and it's why he let him come to the police department every day after that.
You know, he never talked about his mother.
He also tells Ames that the person Shawn identified that day was Larry. Ames is shocked by this, and Bill mentions that after the article came out that she had busted Larry, he noticed that something changed in Shawn. The next day, while Ames is at a park with her son, Shawn comes over to meet her. Ames looks shocked and asks how he found her,
What are you doing here, Shawn?
and he says he just looked for a park around her house because he knew she was supposed to meet her son on that day. Shawn then tells Ames that he just wanted to tell her that he's finally moving on with his life. Ames looks surprised and says it's not over yet, but Shawn mentions that it's over for him, and he hopes she moves on too. Ames cannot believe this, and after she leaves her son, she follows Shawn and Steve as they head to a party. When they get there, Ames waits inside her car. After a while, someone calls her to inform her that Larry has cut a deal with the DA, and he'll be released soon.
Child's cut a deal.
Ames looks disappointed and frustrated because her efforts and sacrifices are now in vain. Meanwhile, as Shawn is at the party, he keeps hearing a voice from his past calling the name Rock. As a bully tries to mess around with someone at the party, Shawn stands up to him and beats him up. Steve eventually stops Shawn and asks what he's doing, but he just asks for the car keys. Steve asks what he wants to use it for, but he doesn't reveal anything. After he gets the keys, he heads out of the house and drives the car away. Ames also sees this and immediately follows him. While he's on the road, Shawn then remembers what happened before his mom was killed. On that day, Terry parked his car on the road, and when Mary asked what was going on, he said he stopped because someone hit their car. As he then got down, he talked to someone who called him Rock and said the words, "The time is up." Terry then walks away, and the man kills Mary while Shawn watches. In the present day, Ames notices that Shawn stopped at Tina's before leaving again. As she heads inside, she sees that Shawn broke in, and after she looks around, she sees a picture of Terry and Larry on the wall, and this leaves her shocked. Elsewhere, Terry arrives home and sees that everywhere is scattered. He then calls the police to inform them that someone broke into his house. After the call ends, Terry sees pictures of Mary scattered on the floor and realizes that it's Shawn. As he meets him in the basement, he asks what's wrong. Shawn then accuses his dad of hiring Larry to kill his mom so that he'll get her life insurance money. Terry denies this, but he confirms that he knew Larry when he was younger.
So yeah, I knew Larry Childs.
Shawn doesn't believe he had nothing to do with it, and he says the insurance money was what Terry used to buy a new house and do other things.
You collected money on her life insurance!
Terry still denies this, and as Shawn points a gun at him, he gets his son to drop it. Shawn then says he's sorry for not believing his dad, and as Terry wonders what he's talking about, he gets killed. Shortly after, Ames enters the house and sees Shawn standing in the dark. She also sees his gun on the table, and she picks it up, after which she asks where Terry is. Shawn says that someone broke in and killed his dad in the basement. Ames knows he's lying, but he tells her that if she really wants to help him, there's no better time to do it. Following this, Ames backs up Shawn's story and throws his gun away so that he won't be linked to the murder. He then sends a letter to Larry to tell him that he has forgiven him for killing his mom. However, he mentions that he wants to know if his dad had anything to do with it. He adds that he has sent 2 stamps and a return envelope to Larry, and that if his dad is guilty, he should use the black stamp, and if he's not, the red stamp should be used.
Let me know if my father was a part of this murder.
Following this, Larry licks the stamp and places it on the return envelope. As he sends it back to the guard, Larry notices that he's suddenly feeling unwell. It then turns out that with Ames's help, Shawn laced the stamp with trislaron to kill Larry. After a while, he eventually suffocates and dies in his cell. Much later, Shawn receives the return envelope while he's staying in Bill's house. As he checks the stamp used, he sees that it's the red one. Even though Larry's answer means that Terry had nothing to do with it, no one would have really expected him to expose his old friend just before he's about to be released. One way or another, Terry had to have known about it because the killer called him by his nickname just before he went on to murder Mary. His decision to also stop his son from picking Larry out as the killer on the night of the murder further makes him look like a suspect.